It's time for supper.
Who are all you people? Where's Mia?
Eat it. It's good.
Dumb some bitch wasn't no good if it hit him.
The Resident Evil series exists in cycles, a constant state of life, death, and rebirth. Every mainline entry furthers one of these three purposes: to continue the working trends of the series, to push it towards its inevitable downfall, or to bring it back to its roots. Resident Evil 7 pushes the series towards that last purpose, taking the series back to where it came from. After Resident Evil 4 saw great success in the action style that the series was moving towards, Resident Evil 6 took it too far, and Resident Evil 7 became inevitable. A full reset in tone and gameplay to take the series back to what made it special in the first place. This is exactly what Resident Evil 7 does. Instead of a globe-trotting story involving multiple main characters, this game tells a focused tale that centers on one location and one outbreak. It centers around a small cast, and this allows it to create more developed characters and a better story all around. The gameplay is focused too, taking a lot of the simple mechanics and structure from even the earliest games in the series. While Resident Evil 7 may look like a modern horror game with its high fidelity and first-person camera, just about everything else feels like a throwback to the 90s Resident Evil games, set in one location, a terrifying and cramped mansion property with puzzles and resource management. It truly feels like the original concept for the series. The combat still takes things from later entries though. The action feels intense and pressured. Boss battles with goals outside of doing raw damage to the enemy feel stripped right from Resident Evil 4. The game takes the best from the series' original heyday, the best from its first resurgence, and adds in new features that create another arc in this ever-evolving narrative to create something entirely new. Resident Evil 7 is a new dawn for the franchise, and while it does feel like previous games in the series, it also feels fresh and is quite inspired by a lot of its contemporaries at the time. The game is a clean glass of water in a barren wasteland that was Resident Evil around the time 6 released. That isn't to say that the game doesn't have issues. Resident Evil 7 makes some choices along the way that don't exactly further its goals. Certain narrative decisions leave the player befuddled, wondering what exactly we're doing here. This game isn't perfect, but it's exactly what the series needed at the time. A revitalization for the franchise, a new freedom obtained, shackles unbound so that Capcom could take the franchise down a new path. This picture that I'm painting is surely one at odds with the images you're seeing on the screen. Resident Evil 7 is gross, disgusting, and vile at certain parts. But this expression of horror is exactly what the series needed at the time. Resident Evil had to scrap everything to find a fresh start somewhere in the rot. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. I'll be diving deep into Resident Evil 7, talking about gameplay, mechanics, story, and every rotted pot of food in between. If you haven't seen my previous videos on the series, I would highly recommend checking those out now. It's not mandatory, but it will provide context for the series' development and story. If you enjoy the video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe to the channel, as it is the only way that the algorithm will be happy with me. I've also been reviewing all of the Resident Evil movies over on my Patreon, so if you're interested in seeing me torture myself, go subscribe over there. The link is in the description. Hey Dad, it's me, your favorite son, and today I'd like to talk about Resident Evil 7. Development on Resident Evil 7 began in 2014, but wasn't officially revealed to the public until 2 years later at E3. Before the game was even announced though, Capcom released a seemingly random VR project called Kitchen. This was basically a way to test the waters for VR, and because the response was so good, they decided to go all in. An integrated report for 2015 revealed that VR was a huge development pillar for the Resident Evil franchise moving forward. And this worked out well for them, with VR modes for 7, Village, Resident Evil 4, and its remake all doing very well. But Kitchen also revealed the tone that Resident Evil 7 was about to take. It was certainly a lot more gritty, dirty, and grounded than the previous entries had been, at least as grounded as a Resident Evil game could be. This wasn't the only thing that was changing this time around, though. Pretty early on in development, Capcom had a big push to make more games with online multiplayer, downloadable content, and microtransactions. You know, all the stuff that you would want in a Resident Evil game. They specifically wanted a Resident Evil game that would tick all of these boxes. Jun Takeuchi was eventually brought into the project as executive producer to try and fix some of these things. Takeuchi's first goal was to enlist Koshi Nakanishi as director of the game, who had previously been a designer on Resident Evil 5 and the director of Resident Evil Revelations. His second goal was to try and set Resident Evil 7 back on track. We went down the list, chopping them out, until we had marketing's worst nightmare, a regular old single-player horror game. This was clearly the overall idea with this project, to bring the Resident Evil series back to its roots. It's clear that the series had gone way off course by the 6th entry, almost including nothing that made the series special in the first place. Masachika Kawata, a producer on Resident Evil 7, was aware of this response, and the team was ready to take the series back to the beginning. We saw a lot of different reactions to Resident Evil 6, both positive and negative. We took a look at the overall state of Resident Evil and the feedback we got, and we asked ourselves, how can we bring the horror experience people remember from Resident Evil 96? In this way, Resident Evil 1 was a massive inspiration for this entry. The team wasn't trying to recreate the action elements of the previous era, and they weren't trying to lean into the absurd nature of the series. They wanted to provide a true horror experience like the original series had on the PlayStation 1. But one of the newest features of Resident Evil 7 was the first-person camera. We had a lot of internal discussion about where to take the series after Resident Evil 6. My boss, Jun Takeuchi, requested that we strip it down to its core, and the best way to express the horror directly is in first-person view. This change was implemented to create a more intimate feel for the game. While Resident Evil 7 was returning to its roots, it was also carving out a new path. These ideologies weren't exactly dueling, they were working with each other to ultimately create a new era for the franchise and revitalize it once again. This would all be done with a new engine to increase fidelity and functionality, called the RE engine. This engine was built to replace the previous MT framework used on Resident Evil games. It had volumetric lighting, photogrammetry used to create high-quality 3D models of characters and objects, and it focused on VR as an option for most of its games. This engine would also be used on the Resident Evil remakes, and eventually even the Monster Hunter, Street Fighter, and Onimusha series. Capcom was also putting a lot of stake into Resident Evil 7, marketing the game heavily across the globe. An initial demo called Beginning Hour was released exclusively on PlayStation Plus as a tonal preview of the game, like how PT was meant to show off the tone of Silent Hills. The game was heavily advertised, with Capcom even contracting Resident Evil escape rooms in major cities around the world. Resident Evil 7 Biohazard was released on January 24th, 2017 worldwide, and on January 26th, 2017 in Japan, all for the Sony PlayStation 4, Windows, and the Microsoft Xbox One. Before we get into the story of Resident Evil 7, let's talk about the gameplay and mechanics that this entry introduces. Resident Evil 7 is obviously a first-person game. This shirks not only the fixed camera perspectives of the original games, but also the third-person camera of the action-era games. This is clearly a contemporary choice, as a lot of the most popular horror games of the time were in first person. Producer Masachika Kawata had specifically noted that the Amnesia and Outlast games were good, but that he wasn't a fan of being unable to fight back. So Resident Evil 7 was going to focus more on combat than actually running away. That being said, Resident Evil 7 is a true horror game through and through. The game puts its focus on atmosphere and tension rather than fast-paced action. Most of the game takes place in a cramped Louisiana homestead, where our main character has been captured and is looking for an escape. We have to fight monsters throughout the different houses in the form of the Molded. These monsters are basically humanoid blobs, but the enemies function the same as a zombie effectively. Aim for the head to do the largest damage. The Molded have different variations like the Crawler that moves a lot faster, and because it's thin, it's a smaller target. There's also versions with sharpened arms like swords and a fat version that pukes a necrotic slime. The enemy variety in Resident Evil 7 is very small though. Outside of a few extra enemies we'll encounter later in the form of different bugs, this is about it. This was by design though, with the team wanting to really focus everything in and remove the largened scope introduced in the previous entries. This all comes back to the issue of scale. Every Resident Evil game since 4 was trying to outdo the previous game. When the conflicts can only get bigger, where else is there to go? If Resident Evil 6 did well, then 7 probably would have taken place on the moon and featured 7 main characters. But the effects start to wear off, and the only way that you can go is back. Resident Evil 7 isn't a reboot, it actually takes place after 6, but it certainly feels like a tonal reboot for the series. We're back in a large house with interweaving hallways, locked doors, puzzles to solve, and a terrifying soundtrack that makes every corner and dark hallway an intense experience. We aren't crashing planes and running through cities to make progress anymore, we're simply trying to get to the next room. The first-person camera furthers this goal by making the game feel almost claustrophobic. Outside of boss battles, there generally aren't large areas to run around in. This means that there isn't a lot of space to run, the option left being to stand and fight. You have to utilize space just as you would any other limited resource in the game. The first-person camera also furthers this new minimalistic HUD that the game introduces. While walking around the house, nothing is interrupting our immersion. The only time we really see anything pop up is when using a weapon or interacting with an object. But that's about it. When we go to our inventory screen, we can see our health displayed on the watch that Ethan gets at the beginning of the game, but this is an in-world HUD, more akin to something like Dead Space. It's a simple change, but it brings the player closer to the world, removing the veil between player and game, and creating a more terrifying experience in the process. Just like the other games in the series, we will eventually gain an arsenal of weapons to fight these enemies with. These weapons are acquired throughout the game, starting out with a pistol, and eventually working our way up to a machine gun or grenade launcher. The biggest change with weapons and combat, though, is that ammo has gone back to being a limited resource. It was pretty easy to obtain more than enough ammo in all of the action-era Resident Evil games, mostly because limiting ammo is more of a horror attribute than an action one. This brings the series back to its roots, and running out of ammo once again makes the game a terrifying experience. Weapons also reload much slower in this entry, a massive change that has never really been present in the mainline games. The original games allowed you to reload through the menus, and in Resident Evil 4, you could upgrade your reload speed pretty early on. This is consequential because in a tense moment, when you need to reload and an enemy is advancing, a few seconds makes a world of difference. This is a contributing factor to just a larger general change that Resident Evil 7's pace is much slower than more recent games in the series. The goal for this game was clearly to bring Resident Evil back to its horror roots, and this game does that in every way possible. The reloading is slower, making the combat more intense. The movement is slower, making it feel impossible to outrun enemies. This game tries to maximize tension in just about every part of its gameplay. It builds tension through its environments, sound design, and structure, and then releases that tension during combat encounters. When the stakes are high, the emotions rise with it, manifesting in fear and anxiety. In all truth, though, Resident Evil 7 isn't very mechanics heavy. It's a pretty simple game that feels most similar to Resident Evil 1. Its inventory system is a mishmash of the single box style of the original games, but with larger items taking up 2 slots. We can't exactly upgrade weapons through the main campaign either. We can get upgrades in the form of injectors, which increase our max health or reload speed, but there are only a few of these in the game. Some of these can be bought in the trailer that we'll visit an hour or so into the game. This trailer sort of acts as a temporary hub. Here we can trade antique coins that are hidden around the environment for these injectors or a magnum. We use similar healing items to previous games. Green herbs can be found around the property to heal the player, and our health is mostly represented by red blood around the screen. We can combine green herbs not with more green herbs, but with chem fluid. This will create a first aid tincture, which we can pour all over our arm to heal us. This is basically the first aid spray of this entry. We can also combine some other things, but again, the crafting system is pretty simple. Everything is very bare bones. Resident Evil 7 is a return to form for puzzles as well. RE6 had basically no puzzles. It was mostly packed with action sequences to fill out its runtime. This extended as far back as even Resident Evil 5, which was surprisingly puzzle sparse for the RE series. This was strange because solving overarching puzzles was basically the structure of the original games. This has returned in Resident Evil 7. Getting keys to move on to the next area, unlocking entrances into other buildings, and solving mini-puzzles takes up a large portion of the project outside of combat and atmosphere. The puzzles are genuinely pretty good too, with a few stumping me for a lot longer than I thought they would. All of this makes RE7 just a breath of fresh air. After inhaling the toxic atmosphere of Resident Evil 6, the next game is a refreshing tank of clean oxygen. There are certain parts of the game that don't quite hit, especially with the story and overall structure, but the gameplay and mechanics bring Resident Evil back to what it was known for. The combat is fun, the exploration is engaging, and the puzzles are well made. Everything feels good here, and it's the first genuinely scary Resident Evil game in, well, a long time. There were so many moments in the game that actually scared me, and they weren't just cheap jump scares. Those are here, sure, but a lot of the fear comes from the tension and the atmosphere. But the gameplay is just the start, because Resident Evil throws nearly everything out the window when it comes to the story and really resets the series. Resident Evil 7 introduces a new main character in that of Ethan Winters. The game begins as we see a video message from Mia, Ethan's wife. She seems like she's in a good place with a recent new babysitting job. We quickly see another video though, as Mia is clearly in trouble. She warns him to stay away, and the game cuts to Ethan doing the exact opposite, driving down a lonely road in the swamps of Louisiana. Mia has been missing for a while, but Ethan is calling a friend to tell him that he's gone looking for her again. Ethan got a letter, supposedly from Mia, requesting that he come here to save her. We quickly come across a large mansion, but the gate is locked. We have to head around a side entrance where we find an abandoned van and a project proposal for a show called Sewer Gators that we'll become familiar with soon. Something that Resident Evil 7 reintroduces to the series as well is memos or files. These were sorely absent from Resident Evil 6, but in this entry they make up a large part of the story. A lot of the specifics of the tale we're going to see are actually stuck within these notes and memos, and investigating these documents is integral to uncovering the real story behind Resident Evil 7. Heading through the overgrown swamps, we can find some makeshift archways and decorations outside, seemingly constructed from animal bones and viscera, but things grow sinister very quickly as we find a woman's purse and driver's license. We can step inside of a nearby guest house, finding some of the most grotesque imagery in the series so far. Rotting food in the fridge, bugs in pots and pans, either food that's gone bad or, even worse, someone was eating this kind of thing. A nearby paper states that 20 people have gone missing in 2 years, and we might have found the place they ended up. Heading upstairs, we find a videotape which we can put into a VCR downstairs. This is a new feature that Resident Evil 7 introduces. We'll find tapes throughout the game, and by playing them, we will take control of the characters that were in the tape or filming the video. In this video, we take control of Clancy, a member of a ghost hunting crew that was investigating this home. I really like this tape because it's a pretty interesting play on the ghost hunters sort of formula, especially for the time. These shows have been popular for a long time, but seeing the creation and how jaded and unbelieving these hosts are is always just really funny.
Why are we in hell this time? Do you ever prep? What's the prep? Shitty house, spooky sounds? Ooh, is it haunted?
There was a pretty bad movie that had a similar premise that released in 2011 called Grave Encounters, and it was a guilty pleasure of mine for a while. As the group wanders through the house, they go through the facts. This farmhouse has been abandoned for 3 years, and the family, the Bakers, went missing. The Bakers themselves are pretty unassuming, but there were rumors about their son, Lucas. One of the ghost hunters, Andre, eventually goes missing, and the remaining 2 seek him out. The host eventually finds a secret passage in the den and sends Clancy down first. Clancy finds Andre bleeding and seemingly infected. This is where the video ends, but it gives us vital information about the secret passage in this home. We can take the same passage that the film crew did, even falling off the ladder that they took down. Their bodies are missing though, and we travel through a waterlogged passage with someone's corpse in the water. Down here we can find tons of trash and information about missing people, seemingly victims of whoever lives here. Luckily, one of these victims isn't Mia, because Ethan finds her still alive. She's immediately upset that Ethan came to save her and tells him that someone named Daddy is coming. We follow Mia through the basement as she guides Ethan around its dark halls. She doesn't want to tell us anything before leaving. She's clearly been traumatized and tortured here for a while. She claims she didn't send the message in the first place, though. Mia tasks us with finding another door through a room in the basement, but she is grabbed by something as soon as we walk away. Upstairs, something has changed with Mia, and she begins to attack. She manages to stab Ethan multiple times and temporarily fights off whatever is taking control of her. She knocks herself out on the floor, but wakes up and tosses Ethan through a wall. We get an axe and fight her off, with Ethan delivering a certainly fatal blow to his wife. Ethan talks to someone on a nearby phone named Zoe. She tells Ethan to get out through the attic. We can find a fuse nearby and get power back to the stairs, but Mia pretty quickly attacks again. She seems to be her normal self, but turns and impales Ethan's hand to the wall. She then uses a chainsaw to sever Ethan's left hand at the forearm. Upstairs, we get a pistol and have to take down Mia with it. But once she's downed, a strange man welcomes Ethan to the family with a knock to the head. This man drags Ethan to the main house where his vision cuts in and out. Someone is shown reconnecting his hand, but Ethan quickly wakes up at a grotesque feast that's been made just for him. The Baker family is all here, similarly changed like Mia was. Ferocious personalities, gray skin, ready to fly off the handle at a moment's notice. The food on the table is a collection of similarly gray mystery foods. Some look like organs and others look like bugs. This meeting gets out of hand pretty quickly though, as Lucas gets too rowdy and Mr. Baker cuts his hand off. He tries to feed Ethan, but obviously he doesn't want to sample the feast here. This causes Jack's wife, Marguerite, to freak out and leave, and just as Jack begins to carve out Ethan's eyes, the family heads outside to respond to the police, who have just shown up. These, mostly, will be the villains for our game. The Bakers have been turned into murder-hungry goblins somehow, and we need to escape their mansion of terrors. The team at Capcom said the game's location and story were both heavily inspired by The Evil Dead, which is quite clear, especially with the rural nature of the homestead. The isolation that comes in a lot of the 70s and 80s horror films, nowhere to run and no one to get help from. But it's also very obviously inspired by the early Texas Chainsaw Massacre films, with the Southern family gone crazy, each member of the family distinct and unique, playing their own role in this overarching dynamic. We'll be able to meet these characters and explore them a bit later, but for now, the goal is simple: survive and escape. Ethan manages to break out of his binds, and the only family member left present is the grandmother in her wheelchair, but she seems barely cognizant. We can begin to explore the house, even finding an article about the missing ghost hunters, but we pretty quickly are set upon by Jack, who is ready to hunt down his escaped prey. We have to sneak around and avoid him in a pretty intense segment. These few rooms that we have access to are designed so well that it's very easy to get spotted, but still possible for us to get away unnoticed. All of the paths through the rooms intersect in the outside hallway, exactly where we need to get to. We can eventually grab a key nearby and get into a crawl space through the laundry room. Here we can find our first sort of safe room. Typewriters as saving methods have now been replaced by tape recorders. This is another return to form since we can actually manually save now, though the amount of times we save is not limited unless we're playing on Madhouse difficulty. We also have an item box in here since inventory space is once again limited. As we're leaving the room, we get another call from the woman we talked to before, Zoe. She tells Ethan to get out as fast as he can, and that we might be able to do this through the main hall. A large medallion is keeping us from getting to the main hall, though. Ethan then talks to a police officer who has come to investigate the house. He, of course, doesn't believe Ethan's story and thinks he's just as crazy as the people he claims are trying to kill him. Luckily, he gives us a knife to defend ourselves, though. We can use this knife to get into the garage. We find the officer here, but he gets attacked by Jack, and by attacked, I mean he gets his head sliced in half with a shovel. We then have a sort of boss fight with Jack, where we can't really do much but try and get the hell out of here. We can get access to the car and try to drive out of the garage, but Jack takes control and tries to impale Ethan on a steel beam, only impaling himself. This doesn't matter though, because whatever Jack is infected with causes his flaming body to rise anyways. The explosion knocks him out for a moment, but he gets back up again, only to take himself out. Upstairs, we can find the medallion and get access to the main hall, a large room that connects most of the other pathways through the house. One of the biggest things introduced in Resident Evil 7 is its wildly different tone. This game is grotesque in just about every aspect. Its style bleeds rotting food and maggots crawling on faded wallpaper. Its villains are murder-hungry hillbillies in a broken-down house. Its enemies are disgusting mold beings, writhing tendrils and filthy muck. The whole game is disgusting by design. We know what we're getting into just from the prologue in the guest house. The food is rotting, the equipment is breaking down, the walls are falling in on themselves. It's decrepit, it's decay, it's rot. This is a huge part of the atmosphere that this game creates. It's trying to disgust you, to revolt you with its rot and gore. It wants to push you away so you can overcome that repulsion and persevere. It's the same design ideology that the first game pushed, including zombies and monsters and tight corridors to push the player away. The fear comes from the things you don't want to see, but also the things you don't expect. In the main hall, we can find a newspaper article about the missing people in the area. The police were investigating, but couldn't find the culprits, that are obviously the Bakers. The interesting thing, though, is that this article was written by Alyssa Ashcroft, an investigative journalist from the Resident Evil Outbreak games, and the mother of Grace Ashcroft, the main character of the recently announced Resident Evil 9. We then get a call from Zoe, who repeats her orders for us to get out as soon as possible. The only way we can exit this building is from the main doorway in the hall. We have to get 3 different dog heads and place them inside the door to do this, which feels like a classic Resident Evil puzzle to solve. One of these is in the grandfather clock back in the living room, another is in a book upstairs, and the final one is in the basement. As we're searching for these, though, we'll see that Grandma Baker has been moved again. She'll pop up at different points throughout the playthrough, almost blending into the environment, but when she does pop out in our vision, it's a short but terrifying realization. We find a note upstairs that seems to be Jack's diary. He's talking about a ship that's washed up on the bayou in a massive rainstorm, seemingly the start of this whole thing. We can find another tape here titled Mia. It seems to have been recorded recently, after she attacked us in the guest house. She's trying to apologize and tell Ethan that she wasn't in control. She's quickly chased by Marguerite, though, and we have to get away from her. This involves making our way around the house and solving a shadow puzzle to unlock the way forward. Mia gets into a crawl space, but she's quickly captured and the videotape ends. Upstairs, we can grab a broken shotgun and replace the old one downstairs so that it doesn't lock us inside. This seems to be a very clear homage to the way that we obtained the shotgun in the first Resident Evil, and also just a classic, reliable puzzle. Upstairs in the back room, Jack finds us once again, though. A lot of the characters here speak about their gift that they've received, seemingly some form of immortality.
As you can see, the family is only part of her gift.
The way that they talk about and represent that gift will reveal a lot about their characters as the story goes on, though. Escaping from Joe, we can take a strange object downstairs and solve a similar puzzle to Mia to orient its shadow correctly and get into the back rooms of this building. There's some more notes in here detailing the victims they were capturing and how Lucas managed to ruin some of them. Pretty quickly, though, we encounter our first enemy, the Molded. These will essentially be our fodder enemy for this entry. The zombies, the Las Plagas, the Molded. We won't know exactly what they are, though, whether a virus infected them, whether a parasite has made them host, or whether they are something completely inhuman entirely, not until the end of the game at least. Part of what makes Resident Evil 7 so interesting in concept and execution is just how mysterious it is. The team at Capcom deliberately kept the mystery surrounding the game until it was released, mainly because they felt that mystery fed back into the horror the game was trying to push. That mysteriousness is so vital to what we want to get across and what emotions we want you to feel. But we're trying to keep it to the minimum as much as possible, so when you finally get your hands on the game, it's going to be such a fresh new experience. The mystery in Resident Evil 7 doesn't just cover the fact that we don't know who these characters are or what's going on. It's that we have no frame of reference for this scenario at all. Just like Resident Evil 4 and 5 thrust their main characters into foreign lands to make the player feel like an outsider, Resident Evil 7 does the same with us and Ethan. Who is Ethan Winters? Who is Mia? Who are the Bakers? Who are these monsters that we're fighting? These are all questions that we'll keep for the majority of the game, but the player is completely in the dark, narratively and tonally. This shift to grotesque rural horror story is untrodden ground for the series so far, and the players further pushing the audience into uncomfortable territory. The mystery isn't just there to obscure the truth and pull punches for the finale, it's to keep you in the dark. After killing this Molded, we find a safe room nearby. We have to head down the nearby staircase to the final Doghead, which is hidden among a makeshift morgue, some sort of engine room, and even a dissection area. This is the point where we can get the Scorpion key and actually get access to the shotgun. We can find a note here from Marguerite's doctor, who found fungus growing in her brain, seemingly from mold. It was causing audio and visual hallucinations. Heading through the basement, we eventually find the final Doghead, but Jack takes it before we can. Trying to grab it on a chain gets us our first official boss fight, though. Jack chases us around this area with an axe. We can use a chainsaw placed nearby, which does a ton of damage to him. When he's stunned, a mutated part of himself seems to appear, and we can hurt him even further. He eventually ditches the axe and arms himself with a motorized pair of scissors. Brute forcing our way through, we can eventually destroy Jack's head, leaving only a moseying pair of legs in our wake. Defeating Jack allows us to finally grab the Doghead and make our way outside. This isn't exactly total escape, though, because we're still on the property. We've just made it to the yard. The structure of Resident Evil 7 is very similar to the original games, solving puzzles in a focused area and exhausting it of all its resources before moving on to other smaller buildings around the outside. We can of course always come back and use different keys or get rewards from new areas. Outside in the yard is a small trailer, which will be our safe room / hub for most of the game. Even though Resident Evil 7 isn't that long of a game, we will come back here a few times to recuperate after dealing with the various areas of the estate. The trailer has an item box and save point just like all the others, but also a few bird cages for us to sink our antique coins into. There's also a VCR here that we can play any tapes that we might find in other areas of the game. Zoe will often also call us in this trailer to give us more information or guide us in our escape. This time, she reveals that she is family with the Bakers, and that their bodies are all contaminated. Mia is infected with the same thing they are, and they need a cure before they can leave. There's a serum that will do just that, but it's hidden somewhere in the old house with Zoe's mother. That's our next destination and area of exploration for this chunk of the game. In here, we will be faced with a different enemy type, one that's more on theme for the member of the family we're focusing on. Marguerite carries around a lantern with her, and this lantern seems to be able to call bugs and insects. She herself is some sort of hive producer. This house is filled with small swarms of insects spawning from nearby nests, and larger ones that fly around and buzz in our face. Some of this can simply be dealt with by using a knife. Others require a higher temperature solution, which is why we quickly receive the flamethrower. This weapon is particularly useful against these enemies, but seems to do far less damage against the molded. Heading through this house, we're basically retracing the steps of Mia during the tape that we saw earlier. We can access a small passageway under the house to find an object that can cast a shadow to solve the same puzzle that she did. Downstairs, we find Mia on the other side of a fence. Ethan is getting frustrated because he still doesn't know what's going on, but Mia can't remember much. It doesn't matter because she's quickly captured by Lucas, the son of the family. We have to make our way to the other side of the building where Mia went in the tape. We get attacked by Marguerite over here and have to fend her off as she throws us into a hole. Shooting her and her bugs enough times will cause her to fall and disappear into a pile of muck. Upstairs, Ethan finds a suitcase with some strange experiment inside. The note tells us that we need a D-series head and an arm to make a serum. To get inside the attic here, though, we need a lantern, and we know the perfect person to get that from. Ethan heads downstairs to find Marguerite gone, and we watch her now disfigured form stalk the tunnels under the house. This takes us outside, where we can head back to the trailer, or enter another part of the old house, where we have our second big boss battle of the game. Marguerite will attack us here, crawling through the window of the house. Since she's transformed, her limbs have grown longer, a grotesque mutation of the human form that only inspires fear. She will crawl along the walls and through holes in the structure to traverse, escaping at certain points to summon more bugs. She seemingly births these things from a nest that's, it's somewhere wacky. This fight is mostly about raw damage, though, and trying to chase her around the house while also managing the insects that she summons. Once we take her down, we've got one member of the Baker family left, and he currently has Mia captive. Since we've defeated Marguerite, we can head upstairs and place her lantern on the scale to open the door to the attic. Here we find a lot of furnishings for what looks like a kid's room, toys all over the floor, and stuffed animals scattered around. Small drawings are on the floor by a girl named Eveline. We can find a hidden compartment in a back room that has the D-series arm that we need. We see Eveline for a short period, and the world starts to change. The walls are covered in scrawlings, and the molded show up to attack. We can get out and talk to Zoe, though, who has the D-series head. She tells us to head back to the trailer, but when we get there, she doesn't show up. Lucas gives Ethan a call and tells him that he's taken both Zoe and Mia captive. The only way that we can get them back is to head into his part of the estate and to play a game that he has set up for us.
Zoe needed a timeout. She and Mia are here with me. And they're keeping each other company.
Just let them both go. What do you need them for?
Nah, that's family business, Ethan, and not your concern, understand?
Lucas's area of the game is very much a sort of Saw-themed torture house. Each of the 3 Baker family members that we go up against in this game are sort of themed around a specific type of horror. Jack and the main house are very much about a killer stalking you. Jack would follow us around and chase us through the halls at many points. It feels like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It feels like the old slasher films of the 70s and 80s. The theme here is very much about how dirty and gross everything is. Jack himself has a sort of ethereal devotion to the gift that he's been given, praising his own powers and displaying them proudly to Ethan. Marguerite, on the other hand, and the old house are themed around the bug aspects of her character. This obviously alludes to the fact that she is a mother. She's birthing insects and having them do her bidding rather than taking care of Ethan herself. She is raising a new type of child here and nurturing these in a different way. It's a nest, a place to get caught like a spider web. Lucas's house feels more like a modern version of horror. Lucas feels like the Jigsaw character toying with his food before he consumes it. He'd rather see his victims tortured and squirm before they die. He puts people through their paces, having them solve mostly impossible puzzles before they inevitably die anyways. In this way, each character feels like a different subsect of the horror genre itself, each of them representing a different era and fascination within the niche. Since everything is represented here and we never stay in one place too long, it always feels like the game is fresh. We're always dealing with new threats and new themes, rather than dwelling on one thing for too long. Before we can actually get to Lucas's building, though, he's placed a head inside the fridge, the head of the policeman. This is a clue that we have to head back to the dissection room to get a key. Luckily, this isn't far, and on our way down there, we see Grandma Baker once again. In the dissection room, Ethan does the grossest thing possible and grabs the snake key from the officer's body. This allows us to get into various rooms in the house that were previously locked. We can enter a room upstairs in the main house that has a secret passageway under its bed. This gives us one of the circuit boards that we need, and the key also unlocks a child's room in the main house. We can find the other board here, as well as a secret entrance to the attic upstairs. Through our exploration, we also find another tape. This one is titled Happy Birthday. In this tape, we play Clancy, again, the kidnapped camera operator that we played at the beginning of this game. Clancy has been taken captive by Lucas and is forced to play one of his sickening, twisted games. The goal for Clancy is to take a lit candle and put it on his birthday cake. It sounds easier than it is, though, because there's an automatic sprinkler that goes off as we walk into the room. This puzzle is quite intricate with many steps involved, and it was actually one of my favorite puzzles in the game. We have to grab a telescope and wash it off with the water to get a code for a locked box. This gives us a doll we can burn to reveal a finger for this animatronic. The animatronic is programmed to write the code for the door that we need, but when we activate it, it carves the word into Clancy's arm. This allows us to grab the crank we need to turn off the water and, thankfully, put the candle on the cake. But the whole puzzle was a farce because we needed to pull a handle that was plugging a nearby barrel of oil to solve it. This means that when the candle is placed, the cake and room explode in a blaze of fire, and Clancy is killed inside. This will be important for later because Ethan will have to go through the same puzzle, and knowing how to solve it without making the mistake Clancy did will mean the difference between life and death. Heading into the testing area, Lucas invites us inside to play. A TV sits in the first room where Lucas has recorded a tape for Ethan to watch. He shows off the fact that he has the D-series head and also showcases his own gift.
You see, Ethan, not everybody wants to turn back the clock. What?
He starts talking to Eveline off screen and points out the fact that he, like his other family members, doesn't want to go back to before they got the gift. A passageway then opens into the building proper. This place is covered with various traps that we have to avoid, mostly tripwires that we can duck under or shoot before we come into contact with them. Pretty quickly, we have to get a code to advance any further, and of course, Lucas won't willingly give it to us. This means that we have to traverse further into the testing area, eventually contending with a new monster that Lucas sicks on us, the Fat Molded. These are much harder to battle against because not only are they far stronger than their normal molded brothers, they spew out vomit in wild directions, which is hard to avoid and does a lot of damage. We get the code off a body in the next room though and can head inside, where Lucas once again traps us. This time in the happy birthday puzzle we saw before. Since we've already seen the codes, we can grab the valve handle right away, preventing us from having to pull the cork out of the oil barrel. Lucas still tries to throw a bomb in the room, but we can toss that into the wall to create an escape route out of Lucas's madhouse. We find Lucas's control room just after he manages to escape, but luckily he left the D-Series head behind. With this, we have both halves of the recipe for the serum. We can see where Zoe and Mia are being held on the TV. Lucas is waiting though, so we have to head beyond the pier. We're assailed by Molded all the way there, and once we get to our hostages, we can finally free them. Zoe takes the 2 specimens and somehow makes the serum behind a nearby box. There's enough for 2, but Jack, who clearly didn't die in our first boss fight with him, has mutated and arrived to take Ethan down. We have one final fight with him that takes place across 2 floors of this boathouse. I do like this fight mechanically, but its mechanics, oddly enough, are the thing that makes it the most frustrating. Jack's mutilated body is covered in eyes, and of course it's a Resident Evil game, so we have to target these eyes as his weak spots. We have to shoot every single one before he'll die. There are ones on top of him, ones on his sides, and even underneath him. The way you can get to these is by bleeding Jack up to the 2nd level and utilizing the hole in the floor. The problem with the fight is just that there's a ton of weak points, and getting each one becomes kind of tedious, especially towards the end. What normally happens is that you've destroyed every eye and you only have one left and spend a few minutes searching for that last one while Jack absolutely slaughters you. It's not the worst thing ever, but it was one of the more annoying things about the game. Once we destroy his weak points, Jack grabs Ethan and we have to shoot his normal eye to deliver the killing blow. Zoe shows up at the exit door and Jack grabs us one final time. We have to use one of the 2 serums on him to cure him, making him mortal once again. Unfortunately, this means we only have 1 serum left, and now a choice to make. The game tells us that we can only use this serum on one person, Zoe or Mia. This will determine the ending that we get for the game, the canon ending being saving Mia, because why wouldn't we save Mia? That's sort of the big problem with this choice, is that it is effectively null and void. We came here originally to save Mia. We don't know much about Zoe, even at this point in the game. We obviously sympathize with her because she's trying to escape her family as well, but we really have no obligation towards her. So if we really have to make a choice, it's going to be Mia. There's some more information here as well in the reveals that we get at the end of the game and in the DLC that the game provides, but for now, the choice just really doesn't make sense at all, and just about everyone is naturally going to pick Mia. This part just really felt unnecessary to me. It doesn't ruin the game, it just feels like a pointless way to get new endings. It's a sort of forced replayability. We could have just had an extra ending that only unlocks if you kill the bosses in a certain way or gather some specific items throughout the game. Regardless, we cure Mia and Zoe is angry, realizing that her fate has been sealed.
Come with us. I'm sure there's someone who can help.
This is my home. Apparently I belong here.
I'll send help.
Don't bother.
There won't be anyone left to help!
Mia and Ethan head off through the swamps in a raft, our goal finally completed. Ethan's wife is saved and even cured at this point, but Ethan has nagging questions. He starts to probe her about her involvement in this whole thing. We come across a massive ship in the water and the 2 are thrown from the boat by something out there. We're now playing Mia for a brief period as she looks for Ethan among the wreckage. Mia pretty quickly finds him, but he's swept away by the mold. Getting through the bowels of the ship, we'll start seeing flashbacks and visions of what happened here. The workers on the ship were freaking out because the other workers had died. Some girl had killed all of them. We eventually see Evelyn actually killing a worker. She's still on the ship now. Somehow this little girl was the cause of all of this. She wanted to be a family with Mia, but clearly Mia didn't fulfill this promise. She eventually guides us to a VCR player and shows us a tape of Mia before the ship crashed, titled Test Subject E-001. Mia is on the ship with someone named Alan. He's injured, and apparently he was the reason that Evelyn got out in the first place. Our goal is to find Evelyn, and we see a nearby note that tells us these two, Mia and Alan, were special ops soldiers. They were meant to transfer Evelyn to the Central American branch so that she couldn't be stolen by opposing organizations. They were supposed to pretend that they were Evelyn's parents so that no one around them would have expected anything. We have to travel the ship and look for Evelyn, and we can monitor our distance to her with our smartwatch. We quickly find some of the mold on the ship, which Mia calls Evelyn's vomit. Once we get to the bottom level of the ship, we can melt the lock on a door with some corrosive. Inside, Evelyn worries that Mia is mad at her and says that she wants her to be her mother. Evelyn runs away once again, though, and it's clear that she is spreading this infection across the ship. Molded start appearing everywhere, and we find Alan upstairs, but he slips up and pisses Evelyn off.
She trusts you. That little bitch, she never trusted. Okay, wait. Evie, no, Evie.
Alan,
I didn't mean to
listen.
call you that.
She's
Evie,
trying to take control. You have to fight her. Evelyn, stop!
After Alan's horrific death, Evelyn spreads the infection to Mia as well. Mia gets into the other room and records the video that we see at the beginning of the game. She tells Ethan to stay away and forget her because she knew that if Ethan tried to save her, it would mean his death as well. Mia runs into Evelyn again as the girl destroys the entire ship in a massive fireball. Mia is dropped into the water and washed ashore. Back in the present, Mia remembers everything, that she was a part of this whole mess, this outbreak, and why it happened in the first place, and Evelyn is the reason that everyone got infected. Evelyn still wants to be a family, though, and Mia, of course, has to shut this down. It seems that this is why Evelyn is doing all of this in the first place, because of Mia's orders to pretend that she was a mother to the child. The young girl got the wrong idea. Being a child, it's difficult for her to differentiate between play and real life. She now thinks Mia will become her real mother, and because of whatever strange powers she has, she's tearing the world down to make this happen. As Mia, we can head further into the ship, where she was attacked the first time. We find out that Ethan is being kept on the lower level. We have to fix an elevator to get there. Once we do, Mia pulls Ethan out of the mold. But before we see that, Ethan is having some sort of vision with the Bakers. They explain that they didn't originally mean to kill people. When the tanker crashed in the bayou, Jack found Evelyn and tried to save her, but his whole family became infected with her gift, as she calls it. After infection, the family became connected to her and couldn't resist the urge to commit the atrocities that they did. Jack makes one request of Ethan, that he saves his family. He wants them to be free of this curse, and the only way that we can do this is by taking down the source, Evelyn. We jump back to the present where Mia is arguing with the girl. She finally frees us from this mold prison and shoves Ethan out of a nearby door. She tells him to look for Evelyn, to finish all of this. She can't hold back, and through the dirty window, it almost looks like she's turning once again. Ethan heads outside and makes his way through the bayou into the nearby salt mines. We can find a transponder in a building that tells us soldiers are investigating the Baker property. They didn't find anything, but are heading towards the mines now. They have orders to kill Evelyn on sight. Inside of the mines, we weave through different interconnected tunnels, fighting molded all the way. In this facility, we'll start to find a lot of notes and photos that begin to really complete but also complicate the story. Someone was sending emails out about the Baker family and specifically Evelyn's obsession with the family unit. We also find some notes on the E-series, which was some sort of new type of bioweapon, seemingly Evelyn herself. The molded, or people that had been infected by the E-series weapon, would gain regeneration abilities. But once the mold reaches the brain, the thoughts of the host begin to connect to the E-series asset. This is why the entire family was obsessed with the gift and felt connected to Evelyn. We can place Eveline's tissue sample that Mia gave us into a nearby container to create another serum. A nearby note reveals information about a project that started in 2000. Some of the details are redacted, but essentially whoever was behind this was experimenting on human embryos with mutamycete fungus that were found. These experiments were the Series A through D, eventually resulting in the Series E Eveline. They chose to make the bioweapon look like a young girl so that she could blend in with the larger populace. Once Eveline gains control of the host, they begin to experience hallucinations, which grow in severity over time. This eventually results in full control over the host. One of the other notes ponders on why Eveline focuses on the family unit. They theorize that she is looking for the lack of love that she received in her upbringing. We head through the salt mines, seeing hallucinations of the girl along the way, and eventually seeing a picture of her, the same picture we saw at the beginning of the game. The picture was marked E-001 because Grandma Baker is actually Eveline. Her appearance has begun to change, and there were little hints towards this the entire time, but this twist actually got me. I had played this game before and still had completely forgotten about this little reveal. We move back through the guest house, eventually fighting shades and hallucinations of both Mia and Eveline. Once we reach the attic, we inject Eveline with a serum, and we see Eveline's other form as she starts to disintegrate and take over the house. There's actually a tragic scene here, and you feel pretty bad for Eveline at the end of the day.
Why does everyone hate me?
There aren't a lot of villains in this game that the team doesn't make you sympathize with. We see a massive mutated face as it moves towards Ethan, and our final boss battle takes place. It's really nothing. We basically just shoot at this face until we're cast out of the house. It attacks us once again, and we can shoot at it as it drags Ethan up into the air and eventually drops him. A helicopter overhead drops a special pistol onto the ground for us. We can use this powered weapon to finish off the monster, just like previous Resident Evil games, except we're not using a rocket launcher this time. After we kill the thing, we see troops repelling from the helicopter. One of these troops reveals himself to be none other than Chris Redfield, looking severely nerfed from his previous designs. Ethan is on the helicopter with a saved and recovering Mia. We get the same classic idyllic ending that we did in Resident Evil 1. Our heroes fly off in a helicopter, the horror of the house behind them. Ethan's narration closes this chapter, but we see a very strange shot of the group that just saved us, called Umbrella Corporation, but this time with a blue logo instead of red. This is a big open end here, which will be explained a bit more in the DLC. For now, I'd like to focus on the main game and how its story is implemented. Personally, I like the story a lot. For most of the game, we see the Bakers as the villains of this entry, and they mostly are. They're constantly chasing us, trying to kill and torture Ethan, and even possibly bring him into the fold with their gift. They want him to assimilate to this hive mind that they have going on. But this is flipped on its head at the end of the game. We get to see this family as they truly were, the people that they are inside. We've known since the beginning, since we saw Mia trying to fight for control, that this wasn't really them. But it's still hard to see past that until they have a one-on-one conversation with Ethan through this molded spirit realm thing. They used to be normal people, good people, that were corrupted and taken control of through the use of bioweapons. It's a story that we've seen time and time again, but it's one that takes the focus here. We really get to drill down into that idea and focus on one normal family that was ripped apart by the machinations of a larger company. Eveline is part of this too, just a lab creation that wasn't meant for this life and never really had a choice in any of this. Everyone here is a pawn in a larger scheme, but flipping the perspective on these characters is basically looking at a few zombies and realizing that they didn't mean to get infected. They didn't want to get bitten and turned. They were just people. It's very humanizing and makes Resident Evil 7 a much more tragic tale than a lot of the other games in the series. I also really like the division of characters in this game. Everyone feels pretty distinct and unique. Each of the Bakers serve a specific purpose and role within the narrative. Jack is the overbearing father, Marguerite is the controlling mother, Lucas is the unruly child, and Zoe is the one that wants out. Mia and Ethan have their own dynamic, their own history, and their own relationship at stake. Putting us in the shoes of Mia for the big reveal of the game is also something the game handles particularly well, once again letting us run through areas before they've become derelict and broken down. There are things that the game doesn't handle so well, though. First of all, the ending of the game feels particularly rushed. Once we reach this final boss fight, it feels like we're building up to a massive crescendo, and then the game is just suddenly over. Chris Redfield appears randomly, and it makes it feel like the team didn't really know how to finish this whole thing. I do like the fact that the game ties itself back into the overall story. Seeing Chris Redfield from an outside perspective, as someone who is just a bystander trying to survive, he feels like a hero. And seeing that hero swoop in to save the day adds a lot to his character, but it also just kind of feels strange and out of place. Also, the final boss fight is quite lacking in the end. A lot of these issues will be tied up and fixed by the DLC, but it honestly just feels like some of the DLC should have been final chapters for the game, rather than just an afterthought to fix things once they'd already gone wrong. But don't mistake my criticism and nitpicking for hatred. Most of this game is incredibly well done, especially when you compare it to the previous games like Resident Evil 6. There's actually a story here that feels really focused, grounded, and meaningful. A lot of the story is hidden in notes and memos that we have to find, decipher, and fill in the gaps. That's something that hadn't really been present in the series for a while, but it's very clear in this entry. But like I said, there's a lot more to discuss with the DLC, because that is almost required to see the actual end to this story. There were technically 4 total playable DLC packs released for Resident Evil 7, obviously discounting the miscellaneous survival packs and coins. The first 2 of these were titled Banned Footage Volume 1 and Volume 2. These packs were collections of different mini-games and small scenarios that either exist as fun modes with extra challenge and content, or light stories that add some more context to the narrative in the main game. The first of these has 3 scenarios: Nightmare, Bedroom, and Ethan Must Die. Nightmare, like many of the others in Banned Footage, sees us playing as Clancy, the cameraman from the very first tape we see in the main game. Clancy has been kidnapped and is now being toyed with by the members of the Baker family in different ways. In this scenario, Clancy is trapped in the basement of the main house and must survive until morning. We do this by fending off waves of the Molded, but also mini boss fights with Jack. There's a decent little system here that allows us to upgrade our weapons, though. There are compactors hidden all around the basement that will generate scrap. We can use this scrap to upgrade our weapons, upgrade our character's health and speed, and even upgrade the amount of scrap that we produce. This mode is incredibly addicting and super fun. Trying to unlock more compactors while also dealing with the enemies, buying turrets and tripwires around the facility is just really fun in general. The second scenario is titled Bedroom, which is a lot smaller scale than Nightmare. This once again features Clancy, but this time he's being tortured by Marguerite instead of Jack. Clancy has been captured and strapped to a bed where Marguerite regularly checks on him and serves him disgusting food. Our goal is to escape this room though, and the only way we can do so is by solving a massive puzzle. This whole scenario is basically an escape room, where we have to collect different items that give us other items that all cascade until we eventually unlock the secret passage beneath the bed. This whole scenario is intense, but there's also the added pressure of the fact that at certain points in the scenario, we set off noises that alert Marguerite to our escape. We suddenly get a countdown timer as she rushes back into the room to check on us. If we don't manage to place everything back in its place before she arrives, then she'll notice that something is off and damage us. If we do this enough, we'll actually die and have to start back from a checkpoint. It's actually a really fun little minigame, and though it doesn't really add much in the overall scheme of things, I found it very intense. It's a neat little horror scenario that we didn't need, but that I was really happy with. The final scenario, Ethan Must Die, is a challenge mode of the main game that sees us moving through a modified version of the main house while fighting far more difficult enemies and eventually fighting Marguerite. This game mode is pretty damn hard, especially because when we die, we have to head back to the place where we got KO'd to get the items that we lost. It's pretty good if you're looking for extra challenge, but it wasn't really for me, though I do recognize that I can see a lot of people really enjoying this mode. The second volume of banned footage was released a month later and featured 3 new scenarios: 21, Daughters, and Jack's 55th birthday. 21 is another Clancy-focused scenario, but this time we're being tortured by the final member of the Baker family, Lucas. This whole chapter is themed around Lucas's obsession with traps and Saw-like games. It's the most similar to a Saw minigame that I've actually seen, maybe ever. We basically have to play blackjack against another victim named Hoffman. Each time we lose in blackjack, we get a finger severed. And of course, if all our fingers are chopped off, we die. When this happens to Hoffman, though, he manages to persevere, wanting to see his family again, and Lucas has to up the stakes. The game gets more and more deadly, pushing through being electrocuted, and eventually sees Lucas propping up Hoffman's dead body just to torture Clancy some more with a final saw blade trap. This is the extent of the story mode, basically a souped up version of blackjack with some cards that we can randomly obtain to push the odds in our favor. The game also has a survival and survival plus mode, both of which add more challenge to the game. There's also tons of achievements for completing various challenges that the game throws at you. I thought the scenario for this one was cool, and it definitely felt like it fit the theme of Lucas's character, but it was probably a bit too long and slightly tedious for me. Once you get past the first round of the game, you kind of get the gist and just really want it to end. I honestly would have preferred another of the happy birthday-like puzzles to solve with a definitive ending that kills Clancy because the solution is unwinnable. Jack's 55th birthday is the second scenario that Banned Footage Volume 2 gives us. It's sort of the closest that this game gets to having a Mercenaries mode. Though it doesn't even come close to the Mercenaries mode in the other games, it is still really damn good and was very addicting. In each scenario, we play Mia, who has to celebrate Jack's 55th birthday by finding various pieces of food all around different environments. We have to give Jack enough food to fill his hunger meter at the top of the screen. This involves running around the house, killing enemies, picking up food, and combining it for larger effect. How fast we completely fill the hunger meter will determine how high of a ranking we are given. There's a ton of depth to this system that makes it super replayable, especially if you didn't get S rank on your first go-around. First of all, there's a lot of different maps here with different item placements, enemies, and challenges to contend with. You can also choose what weapons or items to take with you at the beginning of the round. There's pros and cons to this though, as taking more weapons with you reduces the amount of inventory space you have to bring food items back. But killing enemies more efficiently means more time gained, bringing you closer to an S rank. You can also bring stat boosters, which might increase the amount of health you have or damage you deal. Getting higher ranks unlocks more items in the item box, fundamentally changing how you play the scenario. The whole thing is just really well designed and encourages the player to experiment with loadouts, routes, and items to try and get each environment completed even faster. Of course, the whole thing is wearing this goofy sort of skin that makes it seem like a joke, but it is really fun. Daughters, the final scenario in Banned Footage, is probably the most story-relevant scenario in these 2 DLC packs. It takes place just before the Bakers are infected and allows us to see exactly how things unfolded. It begins on a night when the 4 family members are having dinner, and Jack rescues Eveline and Mia from the crashed ship during a rainstorm. The situation quickly devolves as each member of the family is infected one by one. Zoe has to eventually escape the house, or at least try to. This adds to probably my favorite part of the main game's story, in that it humanizes its villains really well. Seeing the Baker family as normal and honestly very nice people really adds some more heft and tragedy to the main game. Putting us into the shoes of Zoe and seeing how she watched her family turn also adds a lot to her character and makes the player empathize with her a bit more than we did in RE7. The final 2 DLCs released for the game both came out on the same day, December 14th, 2017, almost a full year after the release of the banned footage volume. The first of these DLCs, Not a Hero, mostly functions as an epilogue to the main story, putting us in the shoes of Chris Redfield after he has rescued Ethan and Mia. As the DLC opens, we see Lucas, who, if you remember, we never actually dealt with in the main campaign. He's getting a call from some company and trying to rush them along. We jump to Chris at the Baker residence, who is heading out to find Lucas. Lucas seems to be working for some larger organization called The Connections. They are essentially and effectively the umbrella organization for this entry. They are a mysterious group who is researching bioweapons for financial gain and trade. But there's still one thing that we haven't touched on, and that's the reappearance of the umbrella organization. This is slightly confusing, but sometime between Resident Evil 4 and now, the American branch of the defunct Umbrella Corporation became Blue Umbrella. This is a military company founded to try and clean up the mistakes that Umbrella made. Chris is technically not working for them. He's still working for the BSAA, but is working with them for just this specific mission. It's very strange, and it definitely seems like an idea that was brought up and then immediately abandoned in the next game. Regardless, they are the ones spearheading this effort to capture Lucas and clean up the Baker House incident. As Chris, it's our job to take out Lucas and end this whole ordeal, but he's hiding out somewhere in the salt mines. We have to make our way through 3 different branches of the mine, trying and failing to save the captured soldiers along our way. Lucas is basically doing what he does best here and is torturing these soldiers and playing games with his prey. This DLC is actually pretty good. It of course mostly plays like the main game, except that Chris has a bit more firepower and he can punch enemies when they're stunned, just like he could in previous entries. This was a nice little feature that felt like it fit Chris's character specifically. It added a bit more of an action tone to the scenario, but I was mostly fine with that because it doesn't really disturb the story or tone of Resident Evil 7 too much. There are 3 gates in the main hall of the salt mines. We can only progress through one of these at the beginning because the other 2 have hazards that we are not equipped to deal with yet. Heading through the first one will grant us an upgraded oxygen mask, which allows us to enter a different gate, and that one will give us a night vision goggle set, which allows us to head through the final one. It's all pretty standard Resident Evil structure stuff here, which, like I said for Resident Evil 7, is honestly very refreshing. The DLC also introduces a new enemy type, the White Fuzz version of the Molded. This enemy can only be damaged once we've gained the enhanced ammo type that nullifies their mutation. I honestly thought this was kind of a stupid addition. It's a good idea in theory, but it forces us to switch ammo types, usually in mid-combat. This means reloading the gun and waiting for the animation to finish before being able to fire a shot. I know that I praised Resident Evil 7 for increasing its reload times, but that's because it fit the thematic evolution of this entry, and also tried to further the atmosphere that the game was building. This was all in service of pushing more horror and tension onto the player. Not a Hero is not trying to push more horror or tension onto the player. It still feels like this new version of Resident Evil, but it's more focused on action and intensity rather than slow-paced horror. So this feature now has the opposite effect, making certain combat sequences sluggish and plodding rather than intense and terrifying. After failing to save all of the soldiers in the salt mines, Chris eventually has to save himself. Lucas plans to set off the bomb that he straps to Chris's arm at the beginning of the DLC. I don't know what this game's obsession with left arms is, but it's fixated on torturing and destroying the left hand. Chris eventually submerges his arm in some liquid nitrogen to freeze the bomb before removing it and tossing it at a wall. This allows us to freely go after Lucas and investigate the nearby lab where experiments were taking place. At some point during the Connections research, Lucas killed all of the researchers and took over the lab for himself. At the end of the campaign, Lucas injects himself with something and fully mutates into what basically amounts to a classic tyrant Resident Evil boss. We then end the DLC with a true final boss battle, which honestly feels a lot more like a closer finale than the boss fight at the end of the main game did. Chris finally kills Lucas and ends this all by preventing Lucas from transferring his data outside of the facility. Back at the Baker house, Chris looks at pictures of the Baker family. He wonders if they even did any good here, seeing as they were unable to save the Baker family in the end. Thankfully, the mold has been contained, and this thing won't be able to spread any further. Overall, Not a Hero is a decent DLC. It serves as a good epilogue for the main game, and honestly should have just been a final chapter in the original game. The gameplay's alright, with some additions that work and some that don't. It's also just a little tonally disconnected from RE7, but it does work well to wrap up some loose ends in the narrative. I can't exactly say the same for the final DLC that we'll be talking about, End of Zoe. In this scenario, we play as Joe Baker, a previously unreferenced and undisclosed member of the Baker family that lives out in the Louisiana swamps. Joe Baker finds Zoe somehow crystallized in the forest, seemingly from her exposure to the E-series or molded. Joe is angry that his niece has been infected and takes his anger out on some nearby Blue Umbrella soldiers. He then interrogates one of the soldiers for information. He clearly doesn't trust the company and thinks they were the culprits in the first place. He eventually tells Joe that there is a serum in their camp that will cure Zoe, and this is the goal of the scenario, to find the cure and save Joe's niece. This DLC is mega goofy for multiple reasons. The first being that, who the fuck is Joe Baker? He just isn't even referenced in the main game really, and just suddenly conveniently appears for this DLC. Obviously, we know that he was Jack's brother, and the two actually had a falling out years prior, causing Joe to cut ties with the family, but still, it just feels like he was randomly added on to make this even necessary. The other thing that makes this really goofy is the fact that Joe is a stern, outdoorsy type. He's strong enough to survive in the Louisiana swamp, which means he's also strong enough to kill the molded with his bare fists. That's right, this entire DLC has us fighting the molded off with our hands instead of weapons. It is honestly very poorly implemented, and the whole thing was just kind of a slog to play through. Maybe it was my fault, but the system just never really clicked with me. We can punch with one of our two hands, and combining these punches will result in various combinations. If we happen to stun an enemy, then we can follow up with a finisher move. We can also block attacks just like in the main game, and this is pretty central to basic combat in general. The whole thing just feels really clunky, especially when fighting some of the stronger enemies like the fat molded, where we absolutely can't block their attacks and just have to sort of wing it. There's also the faster molded, which require attacking with ranged weapons like the improvised spears that we can craft as Joe. There's even incredibly cumbersome forced stealth sections that just make the whole thing feel cobbled together. I really did not like this DLC at all, and its combat just feels clunky and dumb. It's not a good time, and it doesn't help that it further reduces the threat of the molded in general. Kind of the whole point of the main game is that the molded are powerful enemies. Ethan is not particularly strong, but he has risen to the challenge. The combination of our main character feeling kind of weak and the game feeling pretty powerful means that we get a lot of tension from even the smallest combat encounters. When you have a guy that's hanging out, assumingly pretty close to the house, who can just absolutely decimate all of these things with only his fists, it kind of makes a lot of what we did feel pretty unnecessary. Once again, it also pushes the action theme a bit further. With Chris, it felt like it fit his character, but the team created a new character for this one, which wasn't really necessary. They could have just tied Zoe's story in with the Not a Hero DLC to tie things up for her, but I suppose that would have prevented them from selling 2 extra content packs. The basic premise of this campaign is that Joe is looking for the serum to save Zoe, but constantly gets set back by outside forces. We specifically contend with a mutated swamp monster that we have a few hand-to-hand boss battles with. This is eventually revealed to be Jack Baker at the end, somehow revived once again. The part of the scenario where the game actually gets kind of good is when we're given a power glove that Blue Umbrella developed. Joe puts this onto his left hand, once again with Resident Evil 7 and left hands, and it powers up the punches from that hand. This basically makes it so that one punch will stun an enemy. This weapon actually feels good to use and is super satisfying, but the problem is that we don't get this weapon until the end of the campaign. We can also get these boxer effigies throughout the story, which will increase our attack power by very small amounts that rarely ever feel like they make a difference. It's almost pointless to even have these in the game because the 1% or 5% effect is never felt, so it's basically like we didn't have them at all. Once we finally defeat Jack Baker by twisting his head off his body, Zoe is delivered the serum and saved. Shortly after this, Chris and his team show up to ensure that the two get out alive. Basically, Chris's role in this game is to show up after everything has already been solved and do almost nothing. Joe and Zoe talk afterwards, and her uncle assures her that her family still loved her, that they were deep down somewhere, past all the mutations and infection. And then, the absolute worst part of this DLC happens right at the end.
Someone wants to speak to you.
Zoe. Zoe, are you there?
It's you. I don't believe it. You actually made it.
We both did.
You didn't forget about me.
I told you I'd send help, and I always keep my promises.
Thank you, Ethan.
This phone call makes me so damn angry for a lot of reasons. For a moment, let's hypothetically get on board with the premise of this DLC. Joe Baker wakes up from his solitary life in the swamps of Louisiana just to save his niece. He fights a deadly hand-to-hand war through these swamps, taking out Molded, eating bugs to survive, and eventually ripping his brother's head off to save Zoe. He does all of this just so Ethan can call right at the end and say, yeah, you're welcome. Ethan didn't do shit. He says in the phone call that he would send help. Maybe he sent Chris to go get them, but Chris didn't even do anything. Everyone would have been fine without his assistance. The only reason that they did this was to absolve Ethan of his guilt for leaving Zoe behind in the first place. When we make the choice in the main game, who to save or who to leave behind, it is sort of callous to just ditch Zoe, and she faults Ethan for this choice. The two don't exactly part on good terms, but the player is mostly okay with making this choice. We have to be. We were forced to. We have no other option. But seemingly, they didn't want Ethan to have made that choice callously, to have left Zoe behind without a thought. So they let him swoop in right at the end and say, actually, Ethan helped save Zoe, so he really is a morally righteous good guy at the end of the day. Good thing he's the main character. It's just so lazy and very annoying. It would have made more sense if this campaign starred Ethan and he decided to journey back into this war zone to try and find Zoe because he was haunted by the decision that he had just made. Then at least there would have been a closed loop on the story, but just to completely throw away everything we did as Joe so that your main character doesn't have an ounce of dirt on him feels so cheap. Overall, it's probably obvious to say that I'm not a big fan of End of Zoe. It feels like an unnecessary addition to the DLC lineup here, and there's honestly a lot of other things that you could have done instead of this. Hell, you could have even made a DLC where we play Zoe as she's trying to escape the swamps and find a cure for herself. Maybe Chris does actually save her in the end, and Ethan called that in, giving him his little redemption that Capcom wanted him to have. But the gameplay and the mechanics introduced here are all just so clunky and weird. It's even more tonally disconnected from the main game than Not a Hero was. The DLC as a whole is just a total mixed bag. It ranges from incredibly goofy and addicting survival games to small stories that enrich the main tale to completely unnecessary side stories that sloppily wrap up the loose ends of the story that the main game was telling. Resident Evil 7 as a whole is a great experience, though, and I know that I've nitpicked it quite a bit during this review, but that's because only those who truly love something can be honest about its quality. And the little things that Resident Evil 7 gets wrong do not manage to overcome the mountain of things that it does right. The game is a return to form for the series. It's the game that most fans of a series wish they could get, but mostly never do. This game truly saved the Resident Evil series from falling by the wayside once again. Just like Resident Evil 4, it swooped in and made the series successful in a time when fans were getting tired with the franchise. It revived the interest, and now the series is once again bigger than ever. A lot of this is due to the fact that Resident Evil 7 is a massive ode to the original trilogy games. For the most part, this game feels like playing an OG Resident Evil game, just with some modern twists. Resident Evil 6 was not a scary game. It was so removed from the original horror concept that it was hard to tell it was even a Resident Evil game at all. And this entry doesn't exactly scream Resident Evil a lot of the time either. It's more of a focused modern horror story set in a rural house. But the structure, the mechanics, and the scale all harken back to the PS1 entries that started this whole thing. It helps that the game is actually terrifying as well. Creeping through the hallways, getting scared by enemies waiting around a corner, and being chased by the Bakers through their home. This game is a constant and intense affair. I don't often really get scared by video games, but when the tension is right and the atmosphere is thick, it just works. Resident Evil 7 genuinely scared me for a good portion of its runtime. At the same time, the story also manages to hold up. It's a really interesting and focused tale, where the last game tried to intersect 4 massive stories that felt like they had nothing to do with each other, and also tie the entire thing into the overall story of the franchise. Resident Evil 7 takes a small narrative, develops it over time, and leaves a lot of mystery to keep you guessing and wondering. The mystery partly feeds into the horror, but it also leaves us closer to Ethan at the end of the day. The fact that we'll never know exactly what happened here, exactly who started all this and when. We were just a bystander, just someone passing through, a man who wanted to save his wife, a small pawn in the grand scheme of things, a witness to a world-ending event, someone that tried to stop it. It feels like this was the spirit of the series originally as well, and that spirit was lost somewhere along the way. But Capcom found that spirit once again, and it worked for them. Resident Evil 7 was a critical success, reviews praising the game's return to horror and story. It currently has an 86 on Metacritic for the PlayStation 4 version of the game. Resident Evil 7 was also a huge success with fans. The game released in January of 2017, and within just days, it had sold 2.5 million units. Capcom initially wanted to sell 4 million by the end of March, and though they didn't quite hit that mark, the game would go on to sell more and more units over time, whether due to word of mouth, content creators playing the game, or just reviews online. The Resident Evil franchise would have its second resurgence, and recently, by April of 2025, Resident Evil 7 had sold 15 million units. It also had the third best debut in the franchise, just behind the heavy hitters Resident Evil 5 and 6. But this was a new era for Capcom and for Resident Evil, which meant that the series would be continuing this first-person horror trend. But we'll talk about that next time. Bye, Dad. Thanks again for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to give it a like and subscribe to the channel. This is the only proven way to appease the algorithm, and you must appease. If you're looking for more Resident Evil, you can head over to my Patreon, where I've been reviewing the Resident Evil movies. I'm just getting into the Netflix era stuff, and then I'll be moving on to the animated films. Also, you'll be able to join this list of absolute ballers right here. I'm currently working on my review of Death Stranding 2, but because that video is going to be so massive, I've been splitting time between it and Resident Evil. I should have Resident Evil 8 out soon, and for the people asking, yes, I am going to be making videos reviewing the Revelations and Outbreak games. After those 3 videos are out, I will compile everything into one large video for your sick enjoyment. Thanks again for watching. Bye now.